Welcome to our final focus lecture in the series for this year. It is an honor tonight to have Beuford Smith and Shawn Walker here with us. Before I dive in exactly to our conversation and introduce them more specifically, I just wanted to give a little bit of the background about how it is I came to know your work, which is, as Alex mentioned, through Louis Draper, who grew up here in Richmond, Virginia. And his sister, who's in the audience tonight, Nell Draper Winston, brought his photograph to me here 5 years ago, and I was absolutely blown away by his work and wanted to know why I hadn't known his work before, and then realized very quickly that he was a founding member of Kamoinge. I'm going to read from Kamoinge's own history, just 2 sentences describing Kamoinge. Kamoinge was founded in 1963 as a collective of African-American photographers seeking artistic equality and empowerment. It works as a forum in which members view, nurture, critique, and challenge each other's work in an honest and understanding atmosphere. Based in New York City, it has met continuously since 1963, so it is still a thriving group. And so I quickly learned how integral Louis Draper had been to Kamoinge, but that opened the door to the members of Kamoinge, and the revelations about this work went on and on as I got to know each of the photographers and just understood what a compelling story this was, which many, many people know, but which has not been in a lot of the history of photography books. And so I felt that this story needs to be heard more, needs to be understood as an integral story to the history of photography in the 1960s. I think that if we don't know about the Black Photographers Annual and Kamoinge in the 60s and the 70s, we don't understand what photography in America was in the 1960s and 70s. So that is just a little bit of a background of how I came to know Beuford and Shawn, and why I wanted to bring them down. So the other context is, out of that research grew an exhibition on the Black Photographers Annual, which was an annual founded by Beuford Smith, who was a co-founder and chief photography editor, and he was working with Shawn Walker as a picture editor, as well as some of the other members of Kamoinge. And we're going to spend the whole evening talking about it, so I'm not going to get too into it. But that, in addition to Kamoinge, the annual grew out of their work and was an effort to produce a publication by Black photographers for Black photographers at a moment when Black photographers weren't getting recognition and representation in the mainstream media. And so we're going to talk about that project too. So there's something of a 4-part structure for tonight. Beuford and Shawn are each going to give you a brief overview of their larger body of work. I've asked them to do something impossible. I've asked them within 10 to 12 slides, which I understand is extraordinarily painful, to give you just a sense from their perspective of some of the things that have been important to them in their career, before we then have a conversation about how the Black Photographers Annual came to be, and then also about the early years, so really just about Kamoinge. And then we're going to close, before we head up to hear some jazz, by talking a little bit about what jazz meant to Kamoinge. So there's your overview for the structure of the evening. Beuford Smith was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and is a self-taught photographer. He was the founder and chief photography editor of the Black Photographers Annual from 1973 to 1981. He's also the founder of Césaire Photo Agency. He joined the Kamoinge Workshop in 1965, a couple years after it was founded, and he served as the collective's president from 1997 through 2003. He's taught photography at Cooper Union, Hunter College, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art. He received a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in 1990 and 2000, as well as a Lightwork Artist in Residence Fellowship and an Aaron Siskind Fellowship. He's had solo exhibitions, most recently at Keith DeLellis Gallery, that show just closed, as well as the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York University, the Schomburg Center, Corcoran Gallery, Tate Modern is upcoming. I'm kind of just skimming just a few. And his works are, again, these are just a few collections in the work of the museum, in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art, Princeton University, Schomburg collection, of course, the VMFA, as well as the Library of Congress. And a few notes on Shawn. Shawn was born and raised in Harlem, has a BFA from Empire State College, and was a founding member of the Kamoinge Workshop. He's exhibited throughout the world, including the Smithsonian, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the Brooklyn Museum, PS1, and as well as the Whitney Museum, the International Center for Photography, and the Museum of Modern Art. He's taught photography for almost 40 years, including at the International Center of Photography, City College, Borough of Manhattan, Community College, Queensborough Community College, and San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, as well as Columbia University. He's a Soros Fellowship recipient, and he's also had grants from the New York Foundation for the Arts, Lightwork, and Columbia University Film Board. So with that, I'm going to let them proceed with their impossible task of giving us a little bit of an interview. I'm going to grab the clicker. A little bit of an overview. Oops, step there. So, Beuford, this photograph is in the museum's collection. And is,
should I hold this?
If you want, unless you can tell me to click. I'm happy to control the clicker.
Oh, that's
the power.
Clicker.
That's the clicker, but I can, whatever you want.
Do it. Now, this photograph, well, I can't actually see the dates too well.
1965. That's a woman in doorway,
Thank
Harlem.
you. This was taken in Harlem. I lived on the Lower East Side during this time, but I would travel to Harlem and photograph in Harlem as well as the Lower East Side. And this photograph was taken in front of Mr. Michel's bookstore. And I would see this woman sitting in the doorway. I saw her there twice. And I said, well, let me take a photograph of her with the advertisement of the posters and the books that she was surrounded by. And I took the photograph, and just as I took the photograph, she looked at me, and I just knew she was going to be angry. But she smiled, and I just nodded and said, like, thank you. And I ended up giving her a photograph eventually. Now, this photograph was taken when I lived on the Lower East Side. It was also called the East Village. This was a woman who I felt was she was a very bubbly type woman, very outgoing. During the 60s, I guess the phrase good vibration was popular then. So she came, a friend introduced me to her because her husband was in the Navy, I think, and he needed some photographs of her. Well, I shouldn't have said it like that, but so she was introduced to her, and I took some regular snapshots of her in my apartment. I had a backdrop, etc. And so I said, I won't call her name because she's a psychotherapist in New York City now. And I said, well, I would like to photograph you, hang out with you for one day or whatever, and just photograph, because she was very vivacious and, very bubbly person. So she said, okay, fine. She said, what about tomorrow? I said, okay, great. So I went to her house to photograph her, and it started to rain. I said, oh, boy. I said, well, we have to cancel this shooting assignment. And she started undressing. So I'm looking. So she said, well, I'm going to go up on the roof and take a shower. So I said, take a shower? She said, yes, it's raining. I'm going to go up on the roof and take a shower. And she said, do you want to come? So I said, I like women, but I didn't want to get undressed, get up on the roof, take a shower. So I said, well, I tell you what, you mind if I photograph you while you're up on the roof taking your shower? She said, no. So that's the story of that photograph. Thank you. And another story to that was that the Museum of Modern Art was going to purchase the photograph, but something came up, and it wasn't sold. And she said, well, that's the only way a black woman to get into the Museum of Modern Art, be nude. So So that they didn't purchase it. And she had the baby maybe a month later after I photographed her, and she called me, wanted me to photograph the child. It was a girl, but I was on assignment in Detroit, so I missed the birth of the child. And this photograph is a photograph of my wife, Evelyn. Now, I have photographed her. I'm willing to go on record saying I think I photographed my wife more than Alfred Stieglitz and other photographers have photographed Georgia O'Keeffe. I could be wrong. And I will also throw in Harry Callahan. So Evelyn was sitting on the couch in our house in Brooklyn, and I saw where this light was. I was amazed at the lighting. I said, Evelyn, don't move, freeze. I said, no, don't move your arm, don't move anything. So I took maybe 2 shots of this, and this is a photograph that's been widely published and advertised. In fact, it's in the book that Kamoinge published called Timeless, and they published that photograph in the Wall Street Journal from an ad from the book Timeless. And this was a photograph that I took up when I was in resident at Lightwork. And Lightwork is a place where for artists to go spend a month and you get paid a stipend of $1,000. And I heard about going to Lightwork, but I couldn't afford to go for $1,000. Not that I was making $1,000 a month, but I didn't want to be out the loop in the course of art directors or whatever calling me, and I wasn't available. If they called and didn't get me, they would call Shawn Walker. So I got a cell phone. First time I owned a cell phone was in 1999. And I told my wife, if anybody calls, just call me on the cell phone and I'll talk to them and whatever. So I only got about 2 calls, but it never panned out for a job. But I ended up talking to my son, Cesar, practically every day. When I was at home, he was around. We never talked. But once I went out of town, he called me practically every day. The story with this is the last day I was at Lightwork, getting back to the reason I went to Lightwork, is Jeffrey Hoon. He wrote me a letter saying, Beuford, a lot of artists come up here and your name always pop up, and would you come up? So like I said, I couldn't afford to go for $1,000. But then a couple of weeks later, he called me. I said, you know what, Jeffrey is calling me. He's the director of Lightwork. I better go. So I went up to Lightwork, and it ended up being a fantastic experience for me. I think I did some of my best work up in Syracuse. Now, this man, I would go down to this area, Salina and Lafayette, was it Fayette?
Yep. Yep.
Right. To photograph in that section. Every time this man saw me, he would move away. He would just say, no, you're not going to take my picture. I could not photograph him. The last day I was at Lightwork, I had about maybe like an hour left downtime. I said, let me go down to Salina. Maybe I'll see something. I'll take a picture. Instead of sitting here in my room. Went down. I saw this man. I said, oh, there he is. He saw me. He didn't move. I was stunned. He said, okay, I guess I trust you. You can take my picture now. So I was about maybe, 2 or 3 yards away from him, took 1 shot, and that was it. And I kind of smiled, and he didn't even make eye contact. He walked off. So that was one of my favorite photographs of this man, that I consider that a gift. And this is a picture of my partner years ago, Amanda. Now I've taken, I don't know how many pictures of her also. I would rank that also with Callahan and Stieglitz or whatever. Because what happens with, I think, a lot of photographers, we don't photograph the people that are close to us, especially our wives or lovers or whoever. But we were up in Nyack. This is 70?
Yeah, that's the wrong date on the slide. 76, I think you said.
76. And we were going to Nyack to look around to purchase a house, and we found out that it was a 45-minute drive from New York, that it wasn't really feasible. But a lot of artists lived in Nyack during that time. But Amanda was sitting in the car, and I was just getting ready to get in to go back to New York, and I told her, here we go again, don't move. And she didn't move because she was accustomed to me saying, don't move. Yeah, I want to do this. Sometimes always being annoyed. Not necessarily, but she froze. And that's how I got that photograph. And that's one of my favorite photographs of Amanda. As a matter of fact, her niece and her husband may be in the audience. I hope they are. Mercedes Moore and Kahani Moore. Kafani? Well, and I've been doing a series on Coney Island for the past 30 or 40 years. And I see these guys at Coney Island maybe 2 or 3 times a year. There's a section where Puerto Ricans hang out, and the Russians go to a certain section, and the blacks, they do their thing there on certain days or weeks or whatever. So I saw these guys, and the guy in the middle holding, the second to the left, holding that object there. When he sees me, he kind of speaks. I say, hey, how you doing? And that's it. So I walked by, and the guy on the right of him said, take our picture. So I was surprised that, after all this time, you say, so I said, okay. So that's how I got the picture, because I don't usually take those type of portraits, but I have done it. But I couldn't believe it when I say, man, this is, a great, well, at least I think it's an excellent photograph. And I don't usually use color, but I see in color, of course, but in photography, I see photography as black and white, because color seems to distract you from the content. It gets more into color, and you don't see what's going on. Well, that's just my opinion. And this was taken out of Coney Island again. This is a photograph of Biggie Smalls, a portrait of him on the back of a man's jacket. And I was a little leery because taking the photograph, I said, if this guy turns around, you associate hip hop or rap, with a whole lot of violence or whatever. But I like rap music, but not the gangster rap. But I said, let me take a chance in photographing this, because I won't see that type of image again, especially the way Biggie was looking at me. And the little girl, she was looking, I said, boy, and the mother was on the right side of her. I said, I got to take this quick, because this won't happen again, because they were waiting for the light. They were getting ready to cross the street. So, hey, Biggie, that was another gift from Biggie. Thank you. And this is from a series that I've been doing since, I think, before 1990. Well, when I started doing it seriously was maybe 90 or something, somewhere along in that area. The wall poster type photography, I was influenced by Alpha Nora, a member of Kamoinge and one of the founders of Kamoinge. He showed me a photograph that he did of a collage of a woman. And in fact, I said, Al, can I have this? He said, oh yeah. So I've had that I have over 300 some photographs that I have collected from friends, students over the years. And so I was influenced by Alpha Nora and also Aaron Siskind in doing abstract, not necessarily called abstract, but wall poster photography. And I applied for an Aaron Siskind grant, I think it was 1999, to do, continue what Aaron Siskind had been doing with poster photography, etc., but only add what I considered a black aesthetic to it. And so I was photographing hip-hop posters, etc., torn posters and so forth and so on. And in fact, one poster that I photographed, I hate for people to talk about images that the audience can't see, but I'm going to do it this time. There's a photograph that I took of a couple. It was a liquor salesman, a liquor ad for whatever liquor was. And I showed it at one of the Kamoinge meetings, and Tony Barboza saw it. He jumped out of the seat. Tony is a very excitable kind of person. He jumps over. Beuford, I took that picture. So I'm saying, hey, Tony, I took that picture about a week ago. How did you take it? He said, well, what I meant was I took that picture about 10 or 15 years ago. It was an ad for some liquor company, but it had withered over the years. And so that was my connection with Tony Barboza with his photograph. But getting to the Aaron Siskind, my proposal was that I wanted to add the, we'd seen posters by Aaron Siskind, Margaret Burt White, and a couple of French photographers, but there always been a white subject matter, and I wanted to add what I considered a black aesthetic to this genre. and I got a grant the first time I applied. I was shocked. So that was my contribution to the poster art genre, Black Ecstatic. And this was taken this year. So my images have shown from 65, whatever, up until a couple of months ago. This photograph was taken out in Brooklyn. I had my grandson with me, Nazir Smith. We were walking around, and I saw this woman there, and the lion, and she saw me right away with the camera. So I said, oh boy, I won't be able to photograph her. So I asked my grandson, I say, Nazir, he's 4 years old. I say, stand over by the lion. So kind of distract. So would distract from the woman, because she saw me and she said, no, you're not going to do this. So my grandson, I have a picture of him, he stood over by the lion, and she just forgot all about it. So I said, okay. So I took the picture. So that was that. So I thank Nazir for that photograph. Now this photograph was taken in 2015. And this fellow was just walking down the street on 125th Street. This was Malcolm X's 90th birthday. There were protesters all up and down 125th Street. Every year, they closed down the shops for, I think, 4 hours on 125th Street. So I saw this guy, and I thought he was part of the demonstration to us. He wasn't marching with them, but I just had a feeling he was with them. So I asked him, you mind if I take your photograph? He said, no. He said, what's going on? What's going on today? What's going on? This is Malcolm X's birthday, and they are protesting, want to close down the shop. So he said, oh, I didn't know that. So he just had on a Malcolm X T-shirt, and he just happened to be walking down 125th Street. So I took his picture. I said, he said, you want me to put the cigarette down? I said, no, I'll just crop that out, because I wanted to take the picture real quick, because cars were coming and people hustling and bustling. So I took the photograph, and there's, in his left hand, he has a cigarette, but I kind of cropped that out, the cigarette out. And this is a picture in color, and I guess black and white, that I enjoy. But as I said, I see in color, but I photograph in black and white. Okay, here now I'm talking about color in black and white. Here's the photograph. There's a group that comes to a Brooklyn park every year. It's called a Punk Rock Festival. And I went there for the first time. It was like a new world to me. I was saying, what's all this? The kids had masks on, paints faded, earrings, up the yin-yang. I was in another world. I said, Beuford, now you see that you're not 20 years old, because you're seeing this is like strange. It was, okay, I won't elaborate on that. But I saw this couple, and I said, do you mind if I photograph you? And they said no. And they was kissing, they were doing everything. So the people there, it seemed like they were all on display, that they wanted to be seen or whatever. This is the first time that people, it seemed like the whole group of people wanted to be photographed. So I said, well, you mind if I take your picture? And the guy said no, and they started kissing. I really didn't want that photograph, which was another. They kissed with the mask on, and it was kind of surrealist, or maybe a Man Ray-ish or whatever kind of thing, but I didn't really want that. So I ended up with this, and I said, you know what, about the American Gothic painting, I'll say, okay, I'll just give this the Afro-punk Gothic. So that was that. So I'll quit while I think I'm ahead. Okay. Thank you.
What's the name of our book?
That's Foreword.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
This is a picture of 117th Street. I was born and raised in Harlem, went to elementary school in Harlem, went to junior high school in Harlem, and eventually went to high school in Harlem. The elementary school is torn down. The junior high school no longer exists as a junior high school, and the high school is now something else. So So when I took my son to show him where I was born, what I did, hadn't been in my block in a while. They torn down my building. They torn down the elementary school. They changed the junior high school, and they changed the high school. This is 1960. My building is the next building down to the left. I wanted to show what the blocks looked like at that period of time. I know everybody in this picture. I started out, when I got into Kamoinge, I would get my cameras loaded, get on my film, and I'm going somewhere to shoot, someplace. 125th Street was generally the place we went. I would wind up not getting off the block. I have shot so many pictures of 117th Street. I think it typified a black neighborhood during that period of time. Now, this is just before heroin. Now, you got to remember, I lived through that in Harlem, and now you guys are living through that. I really thought it had passed. So I'm, like Beuford said, I'm baffled. Because when I was faced with it, it was a crime. Now it's an illness. It's a disease. Do you understand that once the color changes, the illness name changes? Okay? So I put this in to show you what life was back then for us. This is my first, greatest hits kind of thing. A buddy had just got a new camera. We're standing on the avenue. He's showing me this camera. He said, "Oh, yeah, take it. Take a picture with it." I look up, and this is the scene that presents itself. Now, the two people, the woman and the man, just came out of a supermarket. But the key thing about this photograph, this guy's high. The cop was a community cop. He knew, this was his beat. He knew this guy. He stood there patiently and listened to this guy. Do you know this scene? This kid would either get cracked in the head or killed now. This is what community policing means. That a cop is going to stand there, you high, babbling out of your head, and you see, and the cop you see how laid back he is. He's not afraid this is a black man high, I'm scared. Let me put my hand on my gun. Okay? So again, one of the earliest pictures I did in the 60s, and as I'm taking the picture, the two people just walked into the frame. So it just added a little bit more to it. One of my major influences was Roy Decarava. This is 125th Street. Most of Kamoinge was Harlem members, so we all grew up in Harlem. And if you wanted to go someplace to shoot, you go to 125th Street, stand somewhere with your camera, you're going to come away with some pictures. Roy has a picture similar. It's just a young lady walking through almost like a backyard vacant thing. She's got a graduation dress. She's probably going to a graduation. So there's a shambles all around her, and here she is in this beautiful white dress. So what that did was it began my picture catalog in my head about the things that we know and don't think about very much, but until you see a photograph of them and you say, "Oh, wow, I've seen that before, I never thought." So this was my answer to that. This is Easter Sunday. There's a man and a woman. Everybody thinks it's two men. This is when, what was it, the genre? This is when they had black men in high heels. Everybody remember them?
Oh, yeah, platforms.
It's platform shit. This is the period when they were making those movies. And I guess this was now, again, I had left the community by this time, so I didn't get a chance to shoot that series of, this was a come uptown, catch you kind of photograph on Easter Sunday. But it's always been one of my favorite, and understandably, that if you've seen, the brother had platforms. I think his platforms might have been higher than the shoes that the woman had on. Okay? I've shot Easter Sunday forever. Most of us shoot portfolios. Started off shooting maybe in the 60s, shot it up until recently. But what I started doing was going to St. Patrick's Day. Has anybody ever went to St. Patrick's Cathedral on Easter Sunday? It's interesting, to say the least. It always reminds me of a religious Halloween Day parade.
I like that.
I mean, it really does. I mean, it's really kind of, you try to figure out, what does this got to do with Christ and religion and stuff? But what I had planned to do, I've never got to it, but I've always gone up to Harlem and shoot Easter. Particularly, I stand around churches and photograph black women that come out of the church with these amazing hats on. I've always wanted to do an exhibition called Easter in Black and White as a metaphor for how black people celebrate Easter and how white people celebrate Easter. Never got to it, but I went out this Sunday, this Easter. There are no more hats in the black churches anymore. Not only was I brokenhearted, I was amazed. I mean, there was never, now again, because I hadn't shot in a couple of Easters, so I said, well, you know, I know the churches. I live in an area where between 116th Street and 125th Street, there might be 25 churches. Not that many, but a lot. So there's like 4 on the corner. So I know I can just go 2 spots, 116th Street, 125th Street, get all the photographs I want. The crowd was younger. The only people who had hats on were the older women. I mean, the older 80s, 90s, some folks, okay? My work has changed quite a bit, but I shoot events to keep me shooting my culture, trying to present black people in a very positive light. That's why Kamoinge formed. We were dissatisfied with the images that we were seeing of ourselves, even by the white photographers that we respected. That they gave their point of view of who we were, we wanted to give our point of view of who we were, and because we lived in the community, we could take our time and do it. They put on the Million Youth March, so they did the Million Man March. So this was one of the Million Youth March in Harlem. And I just think it's an incredible photograph. You know, you could see the passion in the guy's face. This is a young man. And his son looks more angry and revelatory than his father does. His father is enraptured. The son is like, okay. This was, and again, this might have been 10 blocks from where I live. I spent 26 years in Harlem. Left, went to Cuba for a while, then lived in the Bronx, then eventually migrated down to 6th Avenue and 38th Street. So what that did was it took me out of the black pool. I had no more black subject matter. I'm in the garment district. When you walked out of your door, you had to be sure about where you were going. You could not walk out your door and stand there and think. You would get run over. Okay? So I'm trying to show you, like Beuford, that the photographs I started off with the 60s, and I'm going up to the present. In 1968, I went to Nigeria. And I'm sort of was looking for African religions. Started to get some information about it, but I was an outsider. So couldn't get to the places. I know that they had African ceremonies, and I was really, and I'm with 2 Yoruba priests Yoruba is the religion of Nigeria. So I'm with these guys. They said, man, well, you're outsider people. Come back. First day, 2 days I'm home. I'm beginning to be a coffee drinker. So I don't have coffee in the house to make. I walk up to my local coffee shop to get some coffee. I seen 2 women in white walking around the corner. Any photographer that's been out here in the world, you see 2 people in white, you follow them. You know where they're going, see what's going on. I walk into this event. Now, I ran home, got my cameras, came back here. Now, again, this is 2 blocks from where I was born and raised. I asked the church about this. They said, oh, we've been doing this since the 40s. I have no consciousness of it. I was born and raised on 117th Street. I lived in the community for 26 years, continued to come back to the community in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I found out about it after coming from Nigeria. This is a baptism. It is a street baptism. I've been shooting it. I started shooting in '86, but what they do to baptize the people is they take a fire hose and just go across the street, and everybody, whoever wants to get wet, can get baptized. Right? So this is sort of after the water, but I tried to pick what I thought was the most dramatic thing, because you could see the age level, you can see the rapture, and this is a Pentecostal church. In my youth, I went looking for God. I went to every church that there was. I went to Catholic church and all the churches. The young lady that I was enamored of, Lavinia, I'll never forget her name. I'm 15. She said, well, if you want to hang out with me, you got to go to my church. Now, again, I'm coming out of Baptist churches. I go to this church, and they almost look like a jazz band setup. They got a snare drum set up, guitar player, and trumpet player. Kind of trying to figure out what's going on here. I started clapping, and I don't know what else happened. Seriously. And I kept trying to figure out, but I know my hands were swollen. And I said, oh, wow. Didn't get the girl, but I definitely understood that if I was going to go to church, I was going to go to a Pentecostal church. Because that's where it's happening. I think, no, very seriously, and I mean this. If I'm going to go to church, there's something about there in touch with God that seems very, very real for me. It's not, and I'm not knocking anybody's religion, but you got to remember, I'm an artist. The things that I see, when I was in Cuba, the chaperones kept saying, why do you take those old houses when we got all these new houses we want you guys to shoot? Well, I see the aesthetics in the old houses. So it's the same thing with a Baptist church. If you ever come to this event, I keep saying to myself, one year I want to get a waterproof camera so I don't have to run from the water. This was, I guess, my turning point, and this is an important photograph for me. I photographed it at night. It was way down on the Lower East Side somewhere, and we were on our way to a theater. I think I photographed that thing every time I passed it because it was that night, and the slow lenses and shutter speeds, and I didn't know if it was going to get blurred. But it was one of the metaphors, and one of the things, again, that Kamoinge dealt with. And I remember, I'm out of high school. I went to high school for photography. Didn't know anything about art. Didn't know anything. If you asked me what a metaphor was, I had no idea what a metaphor was. I learned metaphors, and this was, for me, what was happening to us as a nation, as black people. Right? It's one of the few posters, but the chain and the fence really said, this is jail. We're in prison, whether we're conscious of it or not. And it's one of my favorite photographs because Beuford talked about his wall photograph. And let me just say about how Kamoinge influenced each other. I saw Beuford's wall shots. The shot that Beuford did of Amanda, I'll show you my version of that. I saw that picture and it knocked my socks off. I had never seen reflections like that, and in black and white. So most of us don't talk about it, Kamoinge photographers, but all through the 60s, we were surrealists. We didn't talk about it. Photography in black and white is surreal. That's what caught me. Al Fanar showed me a series of his photographs. He had been to Japan, married a Japanese woman, comes back on a boat, and they had these almost Art Deco smokestacks, the round ones and the curves, and these beautiful curves. And he showed it to me in this high-key black and white. I said, what is it? I didn't even think it was a photograph. I didn't know what it was. What is it? What's the form? He said, he looked at me, he said, it's a photograph. And then he looked at me and he said, okay, you want to get in the group, huh? But they let me in. They definitely let me in. They were cool. Again, this is part of the events that I do. This is the Afro-American Day Parade. I shoot the Caribbean Day Parade. I used to do this for two reasons. One, after the 60s and 70s, you just couldn't walk around neighborhoods taking pictures of strange people. That was out as a genre, unless you were ready to battle with somebody. I started shooting parades. Another reason why is because of my timing. Parades kept my timing up. If you're a street photographer, the one thing you want to have is time. You want to be able, personally, Beuford said it, I don't want to take pictures of people who are conscious of me taking pictures of them. I want to catch them in their own nature, their own self. You remember women, as soon as they see the camera, they do something with their hair, check their makeup, do something. That's, the moment I saw is gone. Right, so you want to be stealthy as possible, all right? So for me, the parades really kept my time. You could shoot all you wanted, and you imagine having hundreds of people who want to be photographed. Can you beat that as a photographer? This is the Caribbean Day Parade. Now, these are events that I've been shooting since the 60s. So nobody will ever see all of my Caribbean Day Parade photographs, all my Afro-American Day photographs. But this is a group that it must have been, God, I've never seen such a large group. There must have been 90 to 120 of people in red. The way I did parades was I go out before they started, catch people as they're lining up, getting to their group, socializing, so it's more relaxed. I can ease through the crowds, pick people out. People are standing around. And I must have shot so many photographs on this group, I headed home. By the time I got back home, the parade had just started. The one thing anybody's ever shot an event like this, the one thing you don't want to do is shoot people walking backwards. Okay? So, but this is one of my favorite out of the recent thing I did. I did this in, don't have a date, but in the 90s. It's probably the last time I went. One of the things that happened when I started going to parades, major parades, Puerto Rican Day, Caribbean, some of the major parades they have in New York, there might have been 40,000 people show up, 30,000 people show up. The Caribbean Day Parade brings 1 million people out. So with 1 million people, there's 1.5 million cops. So there's no flexibility, there's no movement, you're locked in, they put you somewhere, even if you have a police press pass, no, we're not gonna let you, you gotta go 6 blocks down that way to cross the street to come here. So I've just given up on them. This is my interpretation of Beuford's Amanda shot. When I saw windows and glass and reflections, it opened up a whole new world for me. This is a series of photographs called Bebop. Right? Bebop represents for me. Some of you know Bebop, when Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, when these guys came on the set, started playing this new music, this different music, that they played the American songbook like you had never heard. You know, that's Summertime? I didn't recognize it. You know, halfway to the tune, we thought, oh, yeah, that's Summertime. I remember that. What I'm trying to do with this now, again, you can't approach people on the streets anymore. All of what I knew about photography is changing. I'm studying art, I'm teaching. I considered myself an artist. I thought photographer was a restraining term for me. So I considered myself an artist. When we started off, when we wanted to learn about composition, could you believe in the 60s there were very few composition photographic books out? So if you want to learn composition, you had to go to painting books. So I've been studying paintings for 20 some odd years. What I'm trying to do in this is talk about the dynamics of a lens, how it photographs, how it sees things, how many layers. So what I'm doing is taking two-dimensional pictures and trying to make them three-dimensional visually. Right? So there might be 6 layers in this photograph. And so it's what's in the glass, it's what's in the window, what the glass is reflecting behind me, what I'm seeing over the top of it. So there's so many layers that you have to try to figure out what's going on. This is a straight photograph. It has nothing been done to it other than sepia tone. I've liked sepia tone for a very long time. This is my second sepia tone portfolio. This is pretty much digital. The Afro-American Parade, I think, started my digital entree. Now, this is the latest work I'm doing. It's called Mysterioso. It's in honor of Thelonious Monk. I'm sure people know. That's why I wore my monk shirt. In my teens, I was an odd kid. I have a brother. I didn't know that my brother and I and my mother and father were middle class. I thought I was one of the guys. I kept trying to fit in with one of the guys. I was hanging out with guys who had 13 siblings in the street. And we say, man, that's a lot of brothers. And he said, man, there's 2 more. They're just waiting to grow into somebody's clothes before they come down. So I'm trying to be one of these guys. We always had suits. We always had, anybody remember Chicago Steelies? Roller skates, they were a brand. Chicago had a brand of skates. They were the best skates you could buy. We always had roller skates. We always had stuff, but you know, we keep thinking. I didn't find out that I wasn't poor, then that I was middle class. I didn't find out until I was 30. I didn't believe that. I mean, seriously, I'm in the park with this woman. My son's there playing, her son's there playing. You know, we're talking about how I grew up. And I said, yeah, I grew up poor. She looked at me and she laughed. I'd never missed a meal. My brother and I used to argue with my mother about having chicken every Sunday. I had buddies that he said, man, my mom had to go out to California to get a job in a plant so she could send money home to feed us. So I tell you that background story so I don't fit in. The guy said, you need to change your style of dressing. You need to kind of act like us. Now, I worked for a cleaners called Black and White, believe it or not, on Madison Avenue. And the service entrance, I'm going to deliver some garments to somebody, come out the service entrance. And I see GQ. This is 1957. Anybody old enough to know what GQ looked like in 57? It changed my world. I said, this is the type of clothing that I want. this is the way I wanted to dress. You got to remember, people in the 50s were wearing, if they were wearing wingtips and wide legs and, you know, the whole two-button suits, and no, I wanted Italian cut, slim, tight. So they said, man, you got to stop wearing that shit. Excuse me. You got to come down to earth. A buddy of mine that I admired, a next-door neighbor, gave me a Monk album. He said, go listen to this. And at first I said, what? No, this ain't. When the album was finished, you talk about revelations, I understood that I had to be who I was. That was one of the most important epiphanies that I had in my life, because I was ready to surrender to these guys, and most of them wound up going to jail. Most of them wound up dying on overdoses. I might have been one of those. But my epiphany said, no, you got to be who you were, and Kamoinge came along. So I fit in right there. So that's how I go into Kamoinge. Does anybody recognize what this might be? This is part of what Beuford was doing early on. This is a wall that they used to hang posters on. And these are just layers of torn off posters, and somebody would go tear them off. You know how you used to try to retrieve them? Some people didn't like them, and they would tear them off. So you would have layers of different color posters, different parts and different shapes. I saw a face, I saw a person. You might not see it, I do. All right, it's a profile. So all it is my seeing, my studying. This was my favorite wall too. That I would go by this was down on 9th Avenue, down by NYU. So the wall went halfway through the block and on the avenue. So I'd just go there and hang out for the day and just stare at the wall. I'd find images. I went home, it was one of my most successful. I'd go home with 3 or 4 images sometimes. That's my Giacometti. I'm sure everybody might know Giacometti was a sculptor that did these very thin, gaunt figures. Now, what this is, it's a crude patch on a sidewalk. All of those specular stuff, it's what the sidewalk is made out of. I didn't put them there. All I did was intensify the color. These are not photoshopped or anything. And if anybody computer-wise, this is when I first got my first computer. This is iPhoto 1. They've changed iPhoto so much that I can't use it. So this is the end of the series. Once I changed iPhoto. The reason, and again, I come from a black and white school. I'm a black and white photographer. This would not have come about if it hadn't been me going to get a computer. I went into digital stuff kicking and screaming. I used to have these long conversations about how I hated computers, and the art that was being made with computers was all terrible trash and made up and non-imaginative and all that. All I did was this. These pictures took me 5 minutes. After I took them, it took me 5 minutes to do this. I don't have Photoshop. I have a lot of other software, and it sits there. Anybody know that? I'm still using the discontinued version of Aperture. Yeah, everybody know that one. That's where I'm at. So it is not the technology for me, because if the picture doesn't work, throw it away. Go shoot it again. Okay? So, but what it did was that it showed me textures in pavement, in concrete, and surfaces that I didn't know was there. All you had to do is hit a couple of filters. Now, anybody know Photoshop? This is simple. You got about 4 or 5 filters you can use. And I played with them, and this is what I got. This is part of a new series. This is the most recent photograph I did that I like. This is part of a tour bus advertising that show that they did. The exhibition, it's an exhibition of, what was it? I guess it's clay. I don't know what it says. It's about bodies peeled up, where the skin is peeled off and you can see the nervous system and you can see those. So, and again, I'm rarely out at night, so I was on my way to see an exhibition that Giacometti did. And again, I use really small, inexpensive cameras to do the work that I do. I want to let everybody know this, you know, because to buy a $5,000 camera is absurd as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned. I'm not working for the New York Times. When I was working for newspapers and magazines, I bought the equipment because it paid for itself. Now the equipment doesn't pay for itself, so I can recommend the camera for all you guys that go on vacation. You just want to come back with some decent pictures. Buy this simple camera. Don't buy anything complicated. Put it on program. I've read articles that even the $5,000 cameras, they're recommending photographers to put it on program because the technology has gotten so good. Okay, so I think that's the last image of mine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Thank you both very much. So now that we have a sense of your work, we're going to return in time, beginning with the Black Photographer's Annual to 1973.
You better turn around.
Sure. I think people can hear. So you can see the big screen. Yeah. So one of the things we did, the exhibition that's upstairs in the photography gallery you should go see, is based on this first photography annual, and we called Beuford. Courtney DeCasey, our archivist, actually figured out that you held copyright at that point and started a conversation about not only doing the exhibition, but digitizing the Photographer's Annual. And so right now, VMFA has all 4 volumes of the Photographer's Annual digitized and online. So it's somewhat inexcusable that I'm going to race through some of these images for the sake of getting you to some jazz music. But I want you to know that you can go online now and see you can flip through the Black Photographer's Annual on your own time and see a lot of these images. So I'm gonna go through some of these images quickly, and then we can talk. I want to point out that Toni Morrison wrote the foreword for the Black Photographer's Annual, which is worth reading in its own time. But I'm just gonna pick one quote. She says, "It's a true book. It hovers over the matrix of Black life, takes accurate aim, and explodes our sensibilities, telling us what we had forgotten we knew, showing us new things about ancient lives and old truths in new phenomena." And this is the list of photographers. I think one of the things that I found so phenomenal, it's 49 photographers and 125 images maybe, around thereabouts. And so this is Shawn's image, which is in the exhibition and was in the first annual.
This is 117th Street again.
This is Beuford Smith, Lower East Side.
Yes.
Yeah, right around the corner.
In fact, I lived on East 11th Street. The park was on East 12th Street. It's right around the corner.
Again, Beuford Smith. Same neighborhood?
No, this was taken in Brooklyn.
Okay.
Fort Bed-Stuy. This was the Lower East Side, Brooklyn. Manhattan.
Shawn Walker had a portfolio of images in the first volume from Cuba.
This is Cuba in 1968.
Which is a moment in Cuban history. Oh, yeah. This will come back in a review. We'll see this image again.
I just wanted to say that I was in Cuba to do a film. So I became a filmmaker for a period of time. So these were shots that I was able to grab when I wasn't filming.
And I'm quickly going to touch on Volume 2 because that had your most extensive portfolio in it. Do you want to?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, that one of the perks of being the photo editor and also editor with Shawn Walker we chose our own photographs. Shawn Walker didn't pick out mine, or I didn't pick out his on this case. We chose our own photographs. And this was an essay that I had done on the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr., and I was able to lay it out like I wanted to. I went to publishers, and no one liked it. They wanted to say, well, it's not color, and blah, blah, blah. To make a long story short, they turned it down. So I laid it out myself. I did the whole selection of the photographs. I think it might be about 12 photographs. I'm not sure. This is a very popular photograph. It's been widely published. I guess Black Man Crying or whatever. So, but could you go back there for a second? He went on the other scene that you don't see in this, but it's on my contact sheet and some work prints, is that this was taken on 125th Street and I think Lenox Avenue. And some black guys had gotten a white workman. He was a delivery man, and they were beating him up. And this guy was saying, please stop, and he was crying, and Martin Luther King wouldn't want this, so that's why he was crying. And this was the last photograph in the essay, and I called it the Fire Next Time, but of course a lot of publishers, they didn't like that title, but of course it came from James Baldwin.
So here we have, you tell us, this is the first annual photograph taken by Anthony Barboza, another member of Kamoinge, in his studio as you're putting the annual together.
And of course, I shouldn't say of course, but that's me on the left. You probably don't recognize me now. On the left, and that's my dear friend, Joe Crawford. He's deceased now, the publisher of the annual. And on the right there is Ray Francis. He's no longer with us also.
Yeah, he's one of the founding members of Kamoinge.
There you are.
And this is at Anthony Barboza's studio. In the far top there, that's Lou Draper. And the other person, I think, is Vance.
Herb Randall.
The person is Lou Draper. And the other person, you said that's Herb Randall?
It looks like Herb Randall to me, what I could see.
I don't know. I thought it was what the hairline could be Herb, but Herb had no dealings with the photography. And
Oh, there you go. I was going to show you.
and that's me there with the glasses, my little hat. Was popular during those days.
And we know who this is.
I'll let Shawn talk about himself.
That's after the Italian suits.
And then we have,
And that's Lou Draper.
But yeah, that's Draper.
so he was also one of the picture editors. So you had a wide,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I chose Lou Draper, Shawn Walker, Ray Francis, and Vance Allen to be on the first selection committee of the annual. And I chose Vance Allen because Vance Allen was an editor at the James Van Der Zee Institute. And Vance Allen's concept of photography was different from the guys in Kamoinge. Vance Allen was more into lines and geometric type photographs. He wasn't into figurative photography, so I felt it was important that we would have somebody who didn't think like us. And Vance Allen was one of the reasons why I chose him to be on the selection committee. And the second contact sheet, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, this is a contact sheet that you've shown just of more sessions putting the annual together.
Oh, right. And the second strip to the left, that's Vernon Grant, who Joe Crawford chose him to be the designer of the annual. And to the right of him is Joe Walker, an editor. He was in charge of publicity and the writing of the annual.
And he's the one who introduced you to Toni Morrison, is that right?
Yes. And that's Joe Crawford to the left. excuse me, and Vernon Grant in the middle, and Joe Walker to the right. Vernon Grant was the art director for CBS during this time. And that's Joe Crawford. He did not like to be photographed. I don't know, he never liked to be photographed. As close as we were, he didn't really want me to photograph him. I said, well, I know you're 6'2", and I'm 5'8", but I'm going to take some pictures. So that was at my loft when I took that picture of Joe.
And so let's go back. Joe became the co-founder with you, but you started the idea much earlier.
Well, Joe really wasn't a co-founder.
Okay.
He was a publisher.
Okay.
Right. Okay, we'll go to this.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about how you came up with this idea much earlier, and that's this is the initial sketch, right?
Right. The genesis of the Photographers Annual, the Black Photographers Annual, came out of me being a member of Kamoinge. And without me being a member of Kamoinge, I seriously doubt that I would have come up with the annual, because I was a printer at that time, an offset printer. And a friend of mine owned a stationery store that had a printing machine in the back. And I had printed up a little booklet called Photographic Images. And so I said, well, okay, let me see if I can do a book on Kamoinge. And I called the guys together, meet it down at my house. I lived on East 11th Street. Shawn Walker and the rest of them, they was in there. And I figured out that they would have to contribute, I think it was $10 or $12 each, to print this little booklet. And so I made this sketch of it. And those are the list of the people who were in it. And it fell apart, and we never continued, so I put it aside. Maybe about 5 or 6 years later, I said, well, you know, let me try to do this again. And that's when Jimmy Manis came in. Jimmy Manis owned a company called Jammy Productions. It was a loft about half the size of this auditorium. And he was making silkscreen prints of Black Power posters and other images. And he also was a filmmaker. And I had a little section off where I had an office where I was working with photography and doing the Black Photographers Annual, well, thinking about it rather. So Jimmy would take the posters and sell them to different colleges. And the market for the Black Power posters sort of fell off during the 60s. It's surprising that it did, but it did. So I told Jimmy, I said, well, you know, since the posters aren't selling, maybe I should try doing the Black Photographers Annual, because, you know, Jimmy traveled around and Jimmy knew how to get money. I'm not good with asking people for money. Jimmy was good at that. So he said, okay, I'll take the strap around, and nobody was even paying any attention. One person said, you know, it's a great idea, but you only have about 10 photographers and they're all from New York. You have to broaden your base with that. Plus you have to come up with the money. So my friend who owned the stationery store, who had the printing machine, I approached him. I told him about, you know, we're trying to get some money. So he said, well, I know somebody who could give you at least $10,000. You and Jimmy come up and meet him. And so we did. And the person will remain nameless now. He eventually died in prison, so that gives you a certain background of him. And he said, well, you know, I like the concept, and I'll give you guys $10,000, but you're going to have to make a couple of pornographic movies for me. So I said, yeah, Jim and I looked at each other. We said, no, we're interested in the women, but we leave that alone. So that died out. So we took the annual, put it aside. About maybe, so this was like 69, 70. So Joe Crawford and I, we were very good friends. I met Joe, well, I won't get into how I met him. I don't know what my time is. But Joe Crawford said, Beuford, if I came up with the money, would you do the annual? I said, of course. So I just, okay. So I gave Joe Crawford a couple of the photographs and the layout that I had done. And Joe came back to me in about maybe a month or 2 months and said, Beuford, I got the money. I said, what? He said, yeah, you ready to do the annual? I said, of course. So then we brought in Joe Walker. I didn't know Joe Walker. Joe Crawford was friends with Joe Walker. And Joe Walker worked for the Mohammed Speak, so he knew, he had connection with publishers and, editors and, black media. So he's the one who got in touch with Toni Morrison, Joe Walker. So when Joe came up with the money, so that's when the ball started rolling and doing the Black Photographers Annual. And the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then this is a photograph of your notes on submission. I thought it was interesting that you put this out. Well, tell us how did you get such a wide variety of photographers to submit photographs beyond Kamoinge?
Beyond Kamoinge, because, in fact, let me go with this. Back in 1973, we gave each photographer $20 for each per photograph. And a lot of photographers today are not getting paid. You just do it for, get my work published. But back then, we gave photographers $20 each. I'm sorry, I got lost here for a second.
This is just you put the call out to the different magazines, newspapers.
Right. And as I mentioned earlier, that Joe Walker, he was an editor of Mohammed Speak, so he had the connection with all the black newspapers, so I wrote up a draft how to get in touch with, send it out. So we did that. So that's how we got black photographers. And someone may think, okay, how did you know they were black? You couldn't tell by the images, of course, but we had a little secret network that how we felt who was black and who wasn't. Let me one thing. And the image, it wasn't about the photographs. Some people say, well, it's the ghetto. It wasn't even about that. You could submit a photograph of a flower or the sun or anything, as long as it was done by a black photographer, and we felt that it was, up to our so-called standards or whatever. So it wasn't about what you call black photography, anything like that. It wasn't even about that.
And then started getting reviews. So this is the New York Times.
In fact, we got fantastic reviews all over the country, Russia, Paris, all over.
This is Washington, D.C.?
And this was a dear friend, Clarissa Wittenborg. She gave us a big play in this newspaper, the Chicago, I can't recall the name of it, I can't see it. First time we had gotten a spread like that. Mm. And this was the black photographer's portfolio. I had nothing to do with this. This was Joe Crawford's idea. When we had done the 4th annual, we knew that we weren't going to the 5th. And Joe said, well, you know what, Beuford? I'm going to do a portfolio. This is going to be, we came on with a bang, we're not going out with a whimper. We're going to do this. I shouldn't say we, but he said we in the sense of the Black Photographers Annual. But if you notice at the bottom, mm-hmm. It's still a Black Photographers Annual publication, but the name had been changed to Another View during this time. And it was changed for Another View because Joe had received money from the National Endowment for the Arts. That's when we got funding. But other than that, Joe came up with the money through friends, et cetera, et cetera. And I didn't invest in any money. It was just sweat equity.
So this is Vanderzee, James.
This is, I know you may say, oh, that's blurred, it's this, but I think this is an important photograph because of the content. You have Mr. James Vanderzee, my dear friend Joe Crawford, the publisher of the Black Photographers Annual, and Mr. P.H. Polk. So I think it's a very historical photograph, and it was worth including. And we met Mr. Polk through Chester Higgins.
And so out of that then came exhibitions. So I thought it was important to talk a little bit, I'll get us to, I know we've got the jazz band's waiting for us, but out of the annual also was a mission to preserve the legacy of previous black photographers, including P.H. Polk, who was coming from Tuskegee, Alabama, James Vanderzee, as you showed the picture, among others. You talked earlier about Scurlock. So you were also then printing here, here we go. For this exhibition, you were helping to also print the works of older black photographers to preserve them for exhibitions. Right,
Mr. P.H. Polk, he didn't have time to print some of his photographs, and I think I volunteered. Yeah, I volunteered that I would print his work.
Yeah.
But he said, "Oh, Beuford, I only have 4x5 negatives, and I didn't have a 4x5 enlarger." So my next door neighbor, Curtis Brown, I asked him if I could use his enlarger, and he said, "Sure." So he brought his enlarger over to my loft, which was 2 doors down. So I used Curtis Brown's enlarger to print about 5 or 6 of Mr. P.H. Polk's photographs.
So now we're going to give an image of Kamoinge, just to give the start.
So I think Shawn should take over.
Yeah, so we've got to speed through at this point, but this is like, we'll kind of do a slideshow of Kamoinge over the years.
This is done at the First Studio Museum, which was on Fifth Avenue, between 125th and 126th Street. This is one of the earlier group photographs we did. Don't know who the photographer was, but that was the beginning of Kamoinge. This is pretty much maybe around late 60s, early 70s. And you can see that it's an eclectic group. One of the things that I want to say that pretty much most of us, the majority of us, were all living in Harlem. And we were almost living walking distance to each other. So we became a family. We used to call each other homies. We started out with homies, got to be family. Now, we met every Sunday, 3 hours, then we go out to eat for another 2 hours. So girlfriends, wives were totally pissed. Totally. Why you got to go sit up with those guys? And they don't know what they're talking about. My girlfriend said that these guys don't have an original thought and they're trying to be somebody that they're not. Now again, Lou Draper comes to New York City with college background degree. Another brother, Asher Collins, comes with a fine art degree. Roy Decarava gets involved. I'm out of high school. I went to high school for photography because I had an uncle who was a photographer. So I'm probably the least technically proficient guy in the group. And they brought me in with open arms. Another one of the members of Kamoinge lived in my block. He said, listen, there's a group of guys getting together. They're going to form a photographic group. So he knew I liked photography. He knew it was sort of in my blood because early on, I decided I was going to go to the streets. So I gave him all of my equipment. It's passé. I'm going to be a hustler. Fortunately, he came back and rescued me. Or else I'd have been in jail, dead with the rest of the guys I grew up with, that were running with. And that's what I meant by family. They took me in. The first group of photographs I brought to show. Now, I had an old Federal enlarger my uncle gave me. I had a lens with no diaphragm, so I used to have to cut out pieces of paper to make my f-stops. I used to use the family ironing board to put my trays on. I had the enlarger on one of those old metal milk crates. The deal was, and I used to wash my prints in the bathtub. The deal with my family was you had to have that stuff out by morning so everybody could get to do what they had to get to work and do what they had to do. I brought those to Kamoinge, and everybody said, man, these are great, blah, 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 blah. Really encouraged me, went out, shot, came back with another set. They said, well, God, we're finally glad you learned something, because that first set of photographs were terrible. Kamoinge wound up getting a gallery. So this is how profound this is. We get a gallery.
Yeah, here, let me find
Lou Draper lives in Langston Hughes' building. So Langston was an influence for us. So we got Roy Decarava, Langston Hughes. Cartier-Bresson comes to our gallery. Right? We had a show with Edward Steichen up at Danbury, Connecticut, up at his hometown. Right? We had 2 portfolios in the Museum of Modern Art. Right? I mean, so we were, for us to have been functioning for 50 years and galleries and magazines and institutions said, man, I never heard of you guys. Well, what hole were you living under? Do you understand? This is a photograph done by Roy Decarava. We were, again, on 125th Street. There was some kind of a disturbing thing. It was after some kind of a riot they had on 125th Street. Roy said, let me get all you guys together, and was it called?
Hatred. Hatred in the streets.
Hatred in the streets. Roy took the photograph. We all laughed about it. Roy was working with Newsweek at the time. So, and again,
Roy,
music, and this is really what's interesting, and that's another reason why I wore my monk shirt. Music was an integral part of Kamoinge, our art, our development. I looked at a documentary on Mary Lou Williams. If you could find it, PBS produced it, at least they showed it. And Mary Lou Williams was a jazz pianist, but she got really heavily involved with the church. And the church asked her to write a couple of pieces for the church. And she said something very interesting. She said to her, jazz was religious music. And that's what it's been for me all of my life. We played it. We talked about rhythms. We talked about improvisation. So my last two portfolios that you saw is about improvisation. I'm trying to take what you see all the time, and they even paid any attention. But I'm flipping it and make you, oh, wow, what's that? Well, it's the same thing that you walked and said, I wish somebody would fix that properly. Okay, so we all became jazzers. Now, and I have to say this too. For all of us, you had to know R&B, because if you wanted to dance and rub up against the girls, you had to know R&B. You know what I mean? That was so, I'm torn between R&B and jazz, but jazz won over. You know, after I got the girls, okay, got you, that's solid, now let's go to the jazz. Okay. Fortunately, the ladies that I've been with liked it, loved it, or tolerated it. Okay? I put on, now I don't use records, I use a digital, everybody, you know, I plug in my iPod, and that goes all day. That's my background music. That's the music that makes me think about creativity. This is a camera magazine. This is one of the first major publications that Kamoinge had. So this is what I mean. For us to not, for people in the industry not to know about us is racism. Right? The other difference is, too, that each of Kamoinge's members developed major careers. I have a serious resume. I've been doing this for 50 years. So you get all these guys with these incredible resumes, and put them together, and you say nobody's heard about you. This is one of the first exhibitions that Kamoinge had. Theme Black at our gallery. We had a gallery in Harlem on 139th Street, which is called Thriver's Row, which is a group of brownstones that still exists, and it's one of the most historical places. It was where all the black doctors and lawyers and professional people bought brownstones. And you have to say that you could, at some point in the 70s, when drugs hit Harlem, and the old folks, their children didn't want these brownstones, and they were getting out of town, you could buy a 5-story brownstone at $15,000 to $20,000 or $30,000. Some of them left the furniture in there. Okay, so this is the second show that we had in the gallery. I was at my physical therapist, and he's in a brownstone. He said that I might be moving, the owner's selling the building. So one of the customers said, well, how much? He said, oh, $6 million. This is a 5-story brownstone. And two of the patients said, oh, that's cheap, you should buy it. But you got to understand, you might not be aware, and just hold on that, you might not be aware of it, but in Harlem, you're paying $1 million a floor for a brownstone floor. If you buy a floor in a brownstone, you got the whole floor, you're going to pay almost $1 million. So when you think about it, $1 million, $6 million was cheap. This is another thing, the International Black Photographers. This is another outgrowth of Kamoinge. Me and another Kamoinge member, like the Black Photographers Annual, we said, hey man, we need to honor some of our senior photographers. Let's put something together to do that. So we decided to do a dinner and a dance. Van der Zee, Polk, Gordon Parks, Minetta Sleet. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Minetta Sleet. Minetta Sleet is one of the most important, undiscovered, unknown black photographers. He worked for, what was it, Ebony?
Ebony.
Worked for Ebony, and the contract that he had, that Ebony owns every single one of his photographs, his negatives. So, but he was honored. So we did 3 of these dinners. The last one, we had 1,500 people show up. It was, like I said, a dinner for those people who could pay a little bit more money and wanted to rub shoulders with the artists. Then we had an open call for photographers. This is Roy and his wife, Sherry, and the opera singer. I don't know, somebody out there knows who she is. Pardon me? Anybody know?
Jesse Norman.
Jesse Norman.
Jesse Norman. Okay.
I was really disturbed that Jesse did not want me to take a picture. How do you come to an opening? You know, you come to the opening, that's what the hand thing is about. And I really wanted to say something, and I wanted to go into my ghetto kind of thing on her. I really did. You know, and I understand the privacy and all of that, but when you're at an opening, then you say to Roy, listen, I'll see you, we'll have dinner after the opening, something, but you don't come in a public place. Oh, photographers, half of the people in there are photographers. All right. This was I think the last one we gave, and in the photograph, this Chuck Stewart who just passed, Roy Decarava, Minetta Sleet, Bert Andrews, and I don't know if anybody heard of Bert Andrews. Bert Andrews shot black theater for years. Studio caught fire, burned up most of his negatives, but somehow or another the Smithsonian was wise enough to buy some of his work early on, so he was able to retrieve it and get a book out. So he's another photographer that you should go, but Bert Andrews is important. There's Beuford. There's another magazine called 810. Now, this is interesting. There's a woman comes from England that knows about us, but New Yorkers don't know anything about us. Right? She did an interview with Beuford. She did an interview with me, I think Tony, and then some other members of Kamoinge Workshop.
Roy.
And Roy.
So now we're starting to move forward in time to show.
Excuse me, one thing we should mention that when we talk about Roy, we haven't mentioned that he was the first black photographer to receive a Guggenheim in 1955.
And he didn't found the group.
And after
as
that,
sometimes gets stated, Kamoinge, but he was
no.
you asked him to be your first president, I believe.
Yes. Well, Shawn would take care of that because I came in 2 years later. Yeah. But Roy didn't. Well, okay, I'll let Shawn.
Let me just say something, too, that was important about the Black Photographers Annual and ICP and most of the events that we did. You got to remember, this was before computers. This was word of mouth. Mm-hmm. You would call a photographer, say you called 10 people. And each person we called, we asked them to call 10 people. And that's how this Black Photographers Annual, that's how the ICP, IBP, and these things really got off the ground by word of mouth. So just always keep understanding that. Before computers, the word still got out. This is one of the last group shots we had until Tony sent you that one?
No,
there's another
you
one
sent me
here.
this one. This is from you, yeah.
This was taken at Herb Robertson's studio.
And this is the scholarship that's been formed?
Yeah, this is at Columbia College in Chicago. We did a major exhibition and fundraiser for them. Now, Kamoinge, other than the short period of the gallery we had, we met in other people's studios. This is done in my home. Over the years, a majority of the meetings were done in my place. We were done in Tony's studio. It was done in Herb's studio. And one thing I have to mention really quickly, once we all pretty much left Harlem, we wound up, Beuford bought Roy's loft. Another photographer moved next door to him. I got his place. Herb Robinson, Lou Draper, who else? Ray
Danny
Francis. Danny Dawson. So now we create a community on 38th Street and 6th Avenue. So there are like 6 Kamoinge members on 38th Street and 6th Avenue. Most people don't know about that, and I think it's important because we were the early of the loft dwellers. Right? And so, again, that's why we became family. Beuford babysitted me. I was a single father. Beuford babysitted for me. Ray Francis babysitted for me. You used to see me with a portfolio in one hand and my son in the other hand trying to go get work. Okay? So, that's Kamoinge. That's the last shot.
Yeah, we're having a little, there we go.
That's the last.
Yeah, good. We're good. We can.